Dasan McCullough is going to be one of Oklahoma's best defensive players this fall. He's got a lot of work to do. We'll talk about that on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Go hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. My name is John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. My buddy here is Josh Helmer. You can follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef. You can also hear him Monday through Friday from 9 to noon on 94.7 The Ref. And Norman and Josh, spring ball continues on. It's a really important time of the calendar year. I don't want to say season, the calendar year for Oklahoma football as they continue to work on install. They continue to integrate new players. They got a lot of new transfers in. And one of those is Dasan McCullough, a guy that was a ESPN freshman All-American this past season with Indiana, had 4 sacks, 6.5 tackles for loss. It was a really productive player for them. He's going to need to be a productive player for Oklahoma this year to help transform that defense into what we need it to be in order for the Sooners to get back into contention in the Big 12.
Well, and he spoke with the media, and if you're catching some of the conversation that Dasan McCullough had with the Sooner Scoops, John Hoover Media, whoever, right? Some of the stories that have been written out there, if you catch some of that scuttlebutt, probably you've seen some of the comments from one Dasan McCullough, and he's getting asked the types of questions, John, that would typify this portion of the calendar year, which is, hey, for somebody that's a transfer, what's it like picking up the playbook? How is that process going along? What's it like playing Cheetah? What does that mean in the Coach Venables defense? So let's start with that first question that McCullough's been asked, right? Which is, how are you picking things up? And obviously sort of gave the stock answer. Hey, it's complicated defense, picking it up. There's a lot to learn, but, we're learning as we go through the spring. And that answer is what you would expect, John, but it got me thinking, how important is this for Oklahoma? It feels like we've attached a lot to Dasan McCullough in this idea that, okay, if it's at Cheetah for Oklahoma, which it sounds like it's going to be at Cheetah for Oklahoma, that's where he's working right now throughout the spring. And he talked about how the Cheetah role, as we know, is versatile. There's a lot of angles to that. You could be, more of a coverage backer, could just be your prototypical linebacker. They could line you up at edge. But for McCullough, based on what we expect, what we think he's going to be for this defense, John, he better pick it up in the spring, right? I mean, that was sort of my big takeaway is, hey, you got the answer that you expected, but we need McCullough we can't be having the conversation 3 games into next season, 4, 5, 6 games into next season. Well, McCullough, he's still learning this defense. No, this needs to get figured out now throughout the spring as we go into the fall.
I agree. And yes, there is a transition period that happens. And you've heard, different assistant coaches talk about the guys picking it up a little bit more, having a deeper understanding of the playbook now being 15 months into a Brent Venables defense. At the same time, you kind of need those guys that you brought in to be impact players to be impact players. And the only way that's going to happen is if they know the playbook, if they're aware of the schemes. And yes, he has a very important role in the Cheetah defense, or as the Cheetah in this defense, because it is a very versatile role. And he's got a lot on his plate, and he's got a lot he's going to have to learn. But you got to learn it. Now, he believes that he's going to be up to speed by the time fall rolls around and fall camp rolls around. There's going to be a lot of details to iron out. And you know what? Having a coach for a dad probably helps some of that. Having, a brother that also plays probably helps some of that. But a lot of it's going to fall on, Dasan McCullough. We're expecting his athleticism to shine come fall. We're expecting him to be a big-time playmaker for the Sooners because he has that ability. But the only way that's going to happen is if he has a really good understanding of what his responsibilities are. And they can be varied from one snap to the next. He could be a rusher one snap. He could drop into coverage the next snap. He can, be playing middle of the field. He could be dropping into a cover 2 zone down the, in the sidelines, covering the flat. So he's going to have a lot to do. And you hate to put this all on one player, and it's not when it's a defense, but kind of a lot hinges on that. If the Cheetah, who has a lot of different responsibilities, is out of place in one spot or on one play, it could just create a domino effect that upsets the whole play call that given snap. And so there's a lot on his plate, and there's a lot of pressure on him to perform, but I don't know if they would put him in that position if they didn't think that he could handle it. They've got, Justin Harrington's going to be there. He's a solid, number 2 Cheetah. At least they're going to be competing for starting spots. But I think a lot of us expect it's going to be Dasan McCullough starting for the Sooners. And then you're probably going to see a rotation between him and Justin Harrington. But you don't bring in a guy with the athletic prowess that Dasan McCullough has and then sit him on the bench.
No, you don't. And I do feel like we knew this, but we got confirmation of it with Dasan McCullough saying, hey, this Cheetah position, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, this Cheetah position, you're going to do a lot of different things, and you're going to line up sometimes at edge and on and on and on. I think that was McCullough's way of sort of revealing to us, John, what we already knew. Dasan McCullough is going to get used in a lot of ways in Oklahoma's defense, and probably that's the case for anybody that is going to be, whether it's Harrington that ends up winning that job and winds up being a number 1. I think that would be a surprise for people just based on the general consensus right now. I don't know if that's based on anything beyond the fact that McCullough had a very productive first season at Indiana where he had the 49 tackles and the 6.5 tackles for loss and 4 sacks, 3 quarterback hurries. That for somebody that young, very, very productive. And so you just kind of, you just sort of parlay that over to the University of Oklahoma and say, okay, well, the numbers should get a little bit better as he gets 1 year older. And, oh, by the way, there's a need for Oklahoma and on and on. It's easy to connect the dots that, hey, he's the guy that's going to be the leader in the clubhouse here. But we did get that confirmation, I think, John, that, oh, by the way, what we thought McCullough's role might be with Oklahoma in terms of the Cheetah position, if in fact he does win the job, yeah, that's probably going to be the situation for McCullough at the Cheetah position. He's going to be asked to do a lot for Oklahoma.
Now, I will say this. Offenses in the Big 12 are vastly superior to the offenses you see in the Big 10. They're a lot more complicated. They're a lot more pass happy. They're just more challenging in a lot of ways. And so that is going to be a bit of a transition. I mean, he's going to have to get used to that aspect where, you're not playing an Iowa team that really didn't have a quarterback. It's going to run it, at you 40 times, or, you're playing Michigan State. Yeah, it's a solid offense, but not one that's going to be putting up, video game numbers. The best offenses in the Big Ten were Ohio State, Michigan, and those were really, really good offenses. But week to week, depth wise, the offenses in the Big 12 are going to provide more challenges. And just because there's a lot more versatility, a lot more speed, they play faster, they get up and down the field a little bit more. There's guys like Deuce Vaughn. There's guys like, he's not in Big 12 anymore, but there are guys that are similar to that just play with a lot of speed, a lot of agility, make you miss in the open field. They're difficult challenges. So that's going to be a bit of a difference for him, taking the step from the Big 10 to the Big 12 is just the level of offensive play. I think now I might be a little biased here, but I think it's much more challenging offensively week to week. And when teams like Texas Tech can have, really good offensive players and have a productive offense that can put up 40 points a game, 35 points a game, stuff like that, it just kind of goes to show that there's a lot of really good offense in this conference.
Well, and one team that I don't know where they're going to finish, but Jalen Daniels is a heck of a quarterback at KU. So, and I wouldn't pick KU to be a top half of the league team. I think defensively they've got a lot of problems, or at least they did this last season in Lawrence. And there's really no reason to just, outside of, I don't know, magically they hit some pieces in the transfer portal. There's no real reason going in to say that the compass is pointing in the direction of KU being a better defensive team. So I don't look at them and say, okay, this is a bona fide top half of the league Big 12 team, but okay, that's a team that's probably a lower third team in the Big 12 that has one of the nation's best quarterbacks. So to your point, I would agree with you that Ohio State, Michigan were the clear best offenses in the Big Ten. And then after that, okay, you know, Caleb Johnson's a terrific running back at Iowa. You have, Braylon Allen, really nice running back at Wisconsin. But generally speaking, top to bottom, you're not seeing a bunch of offenses that are just top to bottom great week after week after week in the Big Ten. And we'll see. You know, I think there's some unknowns in the Big 12 if that's going to continue going into this season. I think one of the best quarterbacks plays for Oklahoma, so you're not going to see him outside of practice. So that part's good for McCullough and OU. I think there's some questions about whether Ewers is really that guy at Texas, but you know they're always going to have skill talent. We'll find out about Arch Manning if the answer is no on Ewers at Texas. I do really, really like Will Howard at Kansas State, but beyond that, I think kind of you're maybe going into a situation where Jalen Daniels, a couple other guys, but beyond that, I don't know how great the quarterback situation across the board is going to be in the Big 12. Historically, though, I'm with you. It's been better in the Big 12 comparatively to the Big 10.
And they just play more sideline to sideline. You know, you see a lot of the jet sweep action, a lot of wide receiver screens, but then they also get really vertical too. So I just think that whereas the Big Ten, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, managing editor of Hawkeye's Wire, but it just seems like the Big Ten is just more straight at you. We're not trying to fool you. We're not trying to trick you. We're just coming at you. We're going to try and beat you with execution and toughness and physicality. Is that wrong?
I think it depends. I mean, I think Ohio State fans would argue that they've been offensively one of the juggernauts in all of college football.
Oh, for sure.
To you know, an argument they're going to win, but you know, I think there's really good athletes in the Big Ten. I would agree that it's more run predicated when you've got teams like Wisconsin and Iowa, and even, you know, Michigan State at times, I think in the past has kind of been that way. And I don't know that you've not had top level NFL star quarterbacks outside of Ohio State coming out of the Big Ten for the most part. Right. And oh, by the way, even somebody that, you know, would be one of the first names to come to mind from Wisconsin in Russell Wilson was a transfer from North Carolina State. So yeah, I get what you're saying. I think that offensively it's been better in the Big 12, generally speaking, on a year in, year out basis, and probably less of the conventional, hey, let's turn and hand off and lean on the run game. But that's also, I think, part of playing North football, right? I think because the weather conditions sort of lend themselves to, you're not going to maybe lean and, you know, rely on the throw game as much being in Wisconsin and Iowa and Minnesota. That's kind of the nature of the beast.
Yeah, you're probably not trying to run a lot of double wide receiver reverses, or you're not trying to run sideline to sideline as much. I mean, again, Ohio State, they're as diverse of an offense as you'll find in the country, and you'll see them do all those things that we're talking about. But I think just generally speaking, Dasan's going to have to kind of get a little bit more aware of it's not just north-south football in the Big 12. There's a little bit of that, but there's a lot of they play all over the field. They play to space, and they try to find space, and they try to attack space in the Big 12. And so that's going to be a challenge. Now he's got experience playing in space, played, you know, safety in high school. I'm sure they dropped him some in coverage at Indiana, but maybe not a lot. But he's got the athleticism to do all those things. It's just a matter of now reorienting himself to that kind of play style, as opposed to just playing edge and being the defensive end, setting the edge in the run game, rushing the passer, that sort of thing. It's a whole big transition for him. And I mean, I think he's up to the challenge. We're going to find out, and we're going to find out, you know, as soon as Big 12 play starts, because that road trip to Cincinnati is going to really test Oklahoma right out of the gate. But Josh, we're going to continue to talk about the running back position as we did on yesterday's show. We talked about Jovantae Barnes' injury. DeMarco Murray spoke to the media after practice on Tuesday and just had, you know, some really good thoughts about the running back room, but also what he's kind of looking for at the position moving forward. But first, let's talk to you all about FanDuel.
NBA playoffs almost here. Now is the perfect time to download FanDuel. That's America's #1 sports book because, hey, new customers, no sweat. First bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets, baby. Bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, it's secure, it's super easy to use, and then you can Bet on everything from the money line to point scores to threes drained, you name it. FanDuel even lets you combine those bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. Don't miss your chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel.com/locked-on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Speaking of getting confirmation, John, I think sort of what I suspected, even though the injury situation right now for Jovantae Barnes lends itself in this direction, even though Jovantae Barnes comes into this spring, he's the leading returning rusher. Based on what I heard from DeMarco Murray, and I guess probably we could play this game with a lot of different positions across the board, right? Even for established guys, what do coaches like to say in the spring? Outside of maybe one or two positions that are very, very clearly locked up, coaches like to say, absolutely, it's a competition. But I'm buying that with DeMarco Murray that yes, this starting running back role, even though Jovantae Barnes is your returning rusher, and even though Jovantae Barnes obviously is dealing with an injury throughout this spring, we know those two things to be true. I'm buying that it's not just because, oh, by the way, Jovantae Barnes is dinged up with an injury. It's open season right now at running back for Oklahoma. And I'm singing the praises. Been saying that I think before it's all said and done, Sawchuk's got a legitimate chance to be number one running back here. But good news, I think, for Oklahoma. There's a healthy spring competition taking place at RB1.
And I think it should. As good as Jovantae Barnes was in 2022, he had some issues at times. I mean, he had the fumble against Florida State in the Cheez-It Bowl, but then there were some struggles in short yardage. I feel like for a guy as physical as he was, as big as he was, that he shouldn't have struggled in short yardage like he did. Again, a lot of that's team rushing ability. Oklahoma's offensive line didn't always get a great push in short yardage situations, but where we stand right now, I mean, he's only been in the system for a year. He had a solid first season as a true freshman. I'll say this: he had a good season as a true freshman, but I think you got to wipe the slate clean and give everybody an opportunity to earn a role. But that doesn't mean that Jovantae Barnes is necessarily taking a step back or he's going to be playing second fiddle to anybody. I'd still kind of put him as the favorite to be the lead running back week one. But you do have a guy in Marcus Major who has been, effective at times. Gavin Sawchuk's got the juice, man, to be a really dynamic player for you. And Kalib Hicks and Daylan Smothers are no slouches in their own right. Like, those two guys can play. And DeMarco Murray was singing the praises of Tabwi Walker as well. And so you got a lot of really intriguing running back options for the Sooners to use, but it's just a matter of, okay, who's going to rise to the top? But I think even if you don't really have one person assert themselves, the idea that you're having this competition, even if it plays out into the fall, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. The idea of having to have a true workhorse running back one, that's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of old. That's an old style of offensive mentality. Anymore, just having a group of guys that you can really rely on and lean on, I think that serves you just as well. I mean, Texas, yeah, they had Bijan Robinson, but they got a lot out of Roshan Johnson as well. You look at TCU with Kendre Miller and DeMarco, the other big bruising back. Like, you got to have multiple guys to be able to be an effective team offensively. And with as many plays as Oklahoma runs, you want to have a group of dudes that can run the ball for you and carry the rock. And I think if you go into the season, you're looking at a trio of Sawchuk, Barnes, and Major, and you're giving those guys, 10 to 15 touches a piece. I think you're kind of in winning. That's a winning recipe as long as they're productive in that stretch, because I feel like they can all be productive with 10 to 15 touches a piece. They don't need high volume. They're not volume running backs. Each of them can make big plays in the open field. So it's going to be really fascinating to watch. Well, and the good news I don't know if we can say this about Sawchuk, just based on the fact that he had 15 carries. Now, both he and Barnes went over the century mark in that Cheez-It Bowl versus Florida State. And it was Sawchuk that really showed some explosiveness in that contest. Not that we haven't seen it from Barnes, but just because we hadn't seen much at all
from Gavin Sawchuk. Really hadn't seen anything until that game. 15 carries right at the century mark, had a touchdown. Jovantae Barnes, though, what we've seen from him, and we saw it again in that Cheez-It Bowl, John, you mentioned it. If I can do the tired, wired here, right? Tired, got to have a workhorse running back. Wired, don't really need to. Let's just divvy up the carries and keep everybody fresh and healthy. But one thing that if you are of that old school mindset, I want to have a clear number one running back, need to have somebody that can tote the bulk of the load. Jovantae Barnes has already shown us he can do that. He did that in the Cheez-It Bowl. He carried 27 times, John, in that game. And oh, by the way, he's got a couple of other games last season that not necessarily totally carrying the load, but oh, by the way, he carried 18 times versus TCU, a game that some would like to forget, but carried 21 times versus Kansas. So that shows us that asked to do that, Jovantae Barnes can't do that. And I wouldn't put it past any of Oklahoma's running backs, whether that's Sawchuk. We haven't really seen Hicks or Smothers yet, but I'm guessing that if DeMarco Murray is offering and signing you, chances are he has a pretty good indication or feeling, John, that if called upon, both Hicks and Smothers, again, could be workhorse type running backs. So not that those guys can't do that, but it's probably a little bit of an advantage, yes, for Jovantae Barnes that, okay, we've seen him do that.
Because you do need a guy that you can trust to get the ball to. And I think that's what DeMarco Murray talked about a lot in this the post-practice presser was, we had Eric Gray. We had a dude that we could rely on in every situation to be a productive player, to take care of the football, to make the tough yards. And I mean, Eric Gray was very impressive last year, asked to do every single thing, and he did it really, really well. Had a breakout season, going to be a top, 4-round, top 5-round draft pick. Really impressive. And so they need to find somebody that they can lean on in a similar way. And one thing that's going to be interesting is that not only are you going to have this group of 4 that we have for 2023, but you're going to have those same 4 guys, assuming nobody transfers out, in 2024 as well. So not only are you really building for this season, but you're also kind of building for the next couple seasons with this group of players. And I mean, it's kind of a great advantage that they've had that they have moving forward, because they haven't really had that. It's just kind of been one-off. Murray talked about it. You had Ramondre Stevenson, then you had Kennedy Brooks, and you had Eric Gray. And so it's just been one by one by one. But I mean, if Jovantae Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk are kind of your lead rushers this year, you're going to have them both back for when you move to the SEC the next year. Oh, and then you're going to have a more experienced Kalib Hicks and a more experienced Daylan Smothers, and then a whole new crop of running backs coming in the 2024 signing class. So the running back group is just going to keep getting better and better over the next couple of years as we transition into the SEC. But yeah, for 2023, it's a matter of, okay, who's going to be the guy that really steps up and takes hold of the running back room? And they're looking for leadership. They're looking for guys to be productive. And Murray talked about vocal. I think some of it is just being vocal leaders too. Barnes and Sawchuk, they're kind of in that leadership role now, even though they're just sophomores, because they're the experienced guys. Now you have Marcus Major and Tawi Walker as well. They got some more experience, but I mean, Barnes and Sawchuk have been the more productive players comparatively to a Marcus Major. So they're going to be looked to a lot. And I think however it shakes out, by the end of the next season, you've predicted that Gavin Sawchuk will be the RB1, and we may very well see that. But I do think that those are going to be your top 2 kind of leading rushers, the guys that get the most carries throughout the 2023 season. We saw that recipe work really, really well against Florida State in the Cheez-It Bowl. And so I don't have any doubt that that's going to be the way it works this season as well. You're probably going to see other guys kind of, mixed in a little bit more than just the top 2 dudes. But I think when it comes down to it, it's going to be Barnes and Sawchuk getting 75% of the running back snaps and carries. And then you might see other guys get the rest of that 25%. But you got to feel really good about what you got just in those 2, regardless of whatever else you get out of Hicks and Smothers. You got to feel really good about what you're going to get out of Barnes and Sawchuk.
Well, and again, not surprising, right? That we're hearing from DeMarco Murray that I'm looking for my starter, I think was the quote. Looking for my starter. Don't know who it is yet. Trying to find out. which guy it's going to be. And I think, as we've discussed in the past, John, because of DeMarco Murray's history, both at Oklahoma and then professionally, he understands, okay, I can say I'm looking for my starter, and that's great. And Eric Gray was your number one tailback a season ago and did a bunch of great things for you. But guess what? Jovantae Barnes still rushed for 500 yards. So it's okay to have maybe your number one running back, but a number two running back that gets plenty of run too. Or if the situation just dictates itself that way, John, to where really, okay, maybe you got a number one, maybe you don't, and maybe it just kind of fluctuates from week to week. And it could fluctuate depending upon, okay, who's going to take care of the football? I know that's pretty standard, but for, a couple of running backs that haven't been, quote unquote, the guy, well, one good way to remain the guy is to not do what Mr. Sawchuk, who I love, did in the Cheez-It Bowl, right? Can't be great when you cough it up, one time. Can't do that in a pivotal moment. So that could be the separating factor here.
Yeah, so the Sooners lost 213 carries from Eric Gray and 33 receptions. Last year, they ran the ball 44 times a game. That's 13 more times than they threw the ball. Now, Dillon Gabriel accounts for some of that because he runs the football as well. And honestly, I need to probably go look at Pro Football Focus because the stupid NCAA still counts sacks as rushing attempts, which is dumb. One day when they get the NIL stuff figured out, they're going to finally fix that as well. Let me go look at Pro Football Focus to see how many times they ran the ball last year. It was 522 strict rushing attempts in total. They threw the ball 474 times. So they still ran the ball more than they passed it, but it's not as big of a disparity. But they want to run the football. They 100% want to run the football. As much as we think of Jeff Lebby as a passing coordinator and he wants to throw the ball, that's absolutely true. He wants to get the ball down the field in big plays, wants to throw those wide receiver screens he loves so much, but he wants to pound the rock. He's an offensive line guy by trade. That's what he wants to do. He wants to get those guys up front, moving people and get the ball downhill in the running game, use a lot of counter, use a lot of, wide zone, stuff like that, because he wants to run the football. So there's going to be plenty of work for all these guys. And I mean, I don't know if they're going to continue to run Dillon Gabriel as much as they did, but they're certainly going to. Like, they're going to run him some, and probably more than we want him to run. But that's just part of Jeff Lebby's offense, and that's kind of what makes it very intriguing and dynamic at times, is the running ability of the quarterback. But both Barnes, Sawchuk, they're going to get run. We saw it in the Cheez-It Bowl. They both got a lot of opportunities. I mean, Gavin Sawchuk, that was his first real exposure to college football. I know he had a play or two at one point earlier in the season, but that's not really it. Like, you can't really get into a feel of the game on one snap. But he got a great experience, a great kind of opportunity just to see college football in that Cheez-It Bowl. And he performed in a great way, like very admirably. So I think you feel really good about however the running backs room shakes out with those two at the top. And then again, what's coming behind him. And then Marcus Major. I mean, this is a guy that, he's one that you could just give the ball to here and there, and he's going to make something happen because he's just an effective runner, effective pass catcher. Now we just got to keep him healthy and get him on the field and get him more consistent. But I think you feel really good about the running back position.
You should, and we'll see. I mean, as this spring goes along, and I know now we're just about 3 weeks out from the spring game itself. So it'd be interesting to see if either young running back before, spring through the summer into next season is over, if one of those two guys really has emerged a little bit to potentially be somebody that is kind of on the radar, because I feel pretty confident in saying right now, assuming that Barnes and Sawchuk are healthy, those are going to be Oklahoma's top two backs. And yeah, you've got Major with a lot of experience there. But then beyond that, I think that both Hicks and Smothers are going to have a chance to maybe get, third team type reps for Oklahoma. So how that maybe shakes out the rest of the way could be interesting, because you just never know, John, at running back. We've seen this before. Maybe, this is dating ourselves a little bit here, but I remember a trip up to Ames, Iowa, where all of a sudden a fullback is your lead ball carrier in that particular instance in Ames. So it can happen that way, to where, because running back, you're turning, giving, and those guys, they take hits and occasionally they get dinged up. So that number 3, number 4 running back, you don't think you're going to need him a whole bunch, but then all of a sudden magically you do.
Oh, I'm here for the Kalib Hicks first carry of his collegiate career. I think it's going to be a violent one, and it's going to endear himself to a lot of Oklahoma Sooners fans. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in and being part of the show. Again, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all platforms. Go leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever it is. Give us that 5-star rating. Give us that Apple review as well. Also, we launched a Discord channel as well to continue our discussion, our chats with you that we have on Monday night, 9 p.m. Central Time. I'm going to drop that in the link over on YouTube. We'll do it on the podcast side as well. So if you want to be a part of the discussion ongoing, you want to drop questions in for us to discuss on the show, we'd love to have you a part of it. Again, it's on Discord. It's an app you can download on your smartphone, on your computer, wherever you like to do your stuff. But until next time, he's Josh Helmer. I'm John Williams. We'll talk to you then. Boomer Sooner.